I first met Josie Dobrin OBE about a decade ago when she was building creative access with her colleagues to tackle the lack of representation in the creative industries, opening doors through real paid opportunities for underrepresented talent. Today, it's a leading force in diversity, equity, and inclusion, shaping how organizations think about talent and leadership. But Josie's work goes deeper into systems, behaviors, and the uncomfortable truths leaders often avoid. And right now, as she steps into her next chapter, her voice matters more than ever. This is a conversation about power, leadership, and what it takes to drive meaningful change. Welcome, Josie.
Thank you, Lynn. This is a real honor to be here. I've been like your biggest fan since we started working together. So it's lovely to be able to have this
Well,
conversation.
it's mutual. So tell me, what is a defining experience from your early life that shaped your ability to navigate complexity, challenging systems that weren't built for everyone?
Goodness. I mean, my early life feels like such a long time ago. I mean, I think I grew up in a very loving, a very loving family, but a family that weren't very good at articulating emotion and how they felt. And that was something that I really had to learn because, I realized that you could actually say what you want and express it. It didn't all have to be coded. So that was something I had to learn quite early on. And then I think as I started in the workplace, I was still come from a family of women. I'm one of three sisters. I've got all female cousins. I've got three daughters. But I felt very early on the male presence in the workplace. And funnily enough, when I started with Creative Access, there was three of us, myself and two other guys. And we got on really well as a team, but it was literally after about a year, this was that I suddenly realized that I felt like I was the one doing all the work, but they were the ones getting all the credit. And it's because they would be the ones that would stand up on the platform and talk whenever we had an event. And I was instinctively shy. I hated public speaking. So at that point, I just had to give myself such a big talking to, which was like, come on, Josie, you can do this. It's like that, fake it till you make it. And it really has. And since then, people like, look at me now and they're like, what do you mean you're not shy? And I'm like, you don't understand how much I hated it. I just had to force myself because I just refused to be in a space where the guys were getting all the credit, yet I was doing all the work. So not all the work, but much of it. So
Yeah, we
yeah,
know how that feels. You know, it's not a very it's really deeply uncomfortable to see that you've done, and I see it every day as a coach. You've done the hard labor, and yet someone else is getting the credit, a man usually getting the credit, and it's really not a nice thing. So, who were the pivotal people in your life that shaped your thinking on leadership and fairness?
I mean, I find this quite difficult because I can't actually isolate one person. Like I'm a big, I really am a massive believer that, the sisterhood is a huge strength for me. And it always has been, as I touched on before. And I think so to surround myself by so many strong, brilliant women, yourself, people like Angie Greaves, who's the first Black DJ, people like
Mm.
Liz Warner, who's up Betty, CEO of Comic Relief and now runs a different kind. There's just, and through people like Denise O'Donoghue at the beginning, and I mean, there's just so too many to count, like Gail Reebok, and just really strong women who I feel have given me energy by being those kind of role models above. So I can't really isolate one. I mean, there are some incredible sportswomen, some incredible people in parliamentarians all over the place. And it doesn't even matter if I agree with their politics. It's actually about seeing them visibly standing up and owning, having agency in an environment which historically has been much harder for them to do so I'd say I can't ask one person, but I do definitely take my strength from people and always have done, for a long period of time, all
Well,
over
the
the shop.
interesting thing is all of those people are disruptors, they're champions, they're truth tellers. And so are you, you
Yeah, I
know.
mean, I do try to be, and I think, yeah, and I think for me, like the other thing that I would like to say that I've learned is that my mantra is always there's two things. One is do unto others as you want to be as yourself, as you want to be treated yourself, and the other thing is lead by example. And I think all of those women showed me that, like they're not just ordering orders about, they're actually getting their hands dirty, being caught in the weeds, and creating change that way.
What did your upbringing teach you about power? who has it, who doesn't, and how to navigate that?
That's a tough question. I mean, I think I learned from my upbringing, being in a small community, but a very powerful community, the power of it. And I, to this day, I'm a big advocate of the power of community and having, you know, people around you that you can call on as and when you need, people who really have your back. So it's not just about, I find in the workplace, you can be in an environment where people will say one thing to you, but then they don't speak up in a group situation always or in public. So for me, I think that's always been something that I've learned very, um, I've always tried really hard to think about.
Who were your people? I mean, you clearly had people. Who were those people in your community that had your back?
Um, so my family, even people like I had an unbelievable art teacher. I've always been involved in fundraising and being voluntary sector. And it's something that I remember very early on, like getting something through the post saying, can you knock on the doors in your street for help the aged? And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And then there was always sort of people that were very involved in those kind of things early on that I would say were people who, an amazing woman called Josie Dobrin, who is a big fundraiser in the world of cancer. So all sorts. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at particulars, I feel like, because I feel like I've just had there's just been so many, like my aunt was incredible, my sisters, but at different periods in my life.
Yeah, did you ever feel like you didn't know your place, or did you feel like you always knew your place?
No, I didn't know my place. And I think it's only in recent years. I didn't really, I never had a real vision in what I wanted to do in my life. I just knew that I wanted something to be authentic to myself. I knew that the causes that mattered to me, I knew that I wanted to be a change maker and whatever it was, but I didn't really know how to do that. And in fact, I studied speech therapy and psychology and I was going to go down that route. But I was planning to go specifically into deaf education, which was a completely different route. And I got a job in a PR company called Luther Pendragon, just temping. I signed up for a temp agency. I didn't know anyone in the creative industries. And it was just before the 1997 general election. And they were running this big campaign called Rock the Vote, which was to encourage youth voter turnout. And because of that, they were like, it was a pro bono campaign, and they were like, we didn't want to invest much time in it, so they were like, let's just give it to the newbie. And actually, I loved it so much, and I ran with it, and it was just the most amazing opportunity for me. It's the first time I saw how you can really affect change through kind of big grassroots and holding the keys to that. And so they offered me a job, and then I was like, oh, what should I do? And I stayed, and that was kind of changed the course of my life forever. So I was not purposeful, and I think that's okay because I love the idea of having that kind of squiggly career and
And
seeing my
and you
life.
know what? It takes time. Sometimes I think there's people that are just born, they come out and they know what they're supposed to do and what they want to do. But for most people, it's a journey.
Yeah,
And
look at you.
you
You've
know,
done so many things. You've got so many strings to your bow, and I think I love that.
and I just let it, I knew there were certain principles that I always wanted to have. And through my career, through the course of my career, there is a string there that, binds all of it together. But I think that it takes time and it takes life experience for you to have those light bulb moments and go, hey, I found something I really love. So the work that you do requires both resilience and precision. And so what keeps you sharp in rooms where the stakes are high and resistance can be subtle and sometimes
Uh,
not so subtle?
yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question now. I think that when you've got, where the resistance is a bit subtle, I think it's not really about kind of winning. It's much more about kind of keeping your own internal state calm. I
Mhm.
think, thinking about myself, sort of low friction questions like, what would make this more workable? What do you see as a big risk around here? So trying to be a bit kind of, separating the ego from the outcome, because I see that a lot in those kind of rooms. So, if you're in a high stake environment, it can make things feel really personal. So I think that's really important not to do that. And, slowing things down, having a kind of, so what I do when things go really crazy, having a sort of default reset if things are a bit tense. And for me, that's like counting to 10 or taking some deep breaths or that kind of thing. So I think, and also the other thing I would say is that people tend not to kind of resist just because of logic. I mean, normally there's something else going on there. It might be because of like something that they haven't said outright, whether it's constraints or risks or incentives or whatever. So it's like trying to kind of map in your head, like, what is it that matters to these people? And then after the meeting, kind of having a bit of time to think about it. So it's quite a long answer, but I think there's sort of a few different things that I use.
Do you have any non-negotiables? Well, I mean, non-negotiables that anchor you.
Yeah, I mean, I really, I mean, I do believe, like, I firmly, like, that kind of equity is where I hang my hat always. And I think that seeing people put other people in public is like the worst thing for me to do. And I would always call that out. And it's something that I've learned to do. So for me, that's a real non-negotiable. And I think if you have that clarity beforehand when you're going into something, that will help you, because you know where you can flex, and you can't. For me, that's a real non-negotiable. What else? I mean, it's funny, we were talking about this before, but I think increasingly as I get older, I have the confidence to be able to state things that are non-negotiable, like constantly being asked to do things for free when actually I should be paid for it, and things like that. So I think historically I would have let things pass, that now I'm feeling more robust, and I'm really trying to instill that in my own kids, my own daughters, to say, you don't have to accept things.
Excellent. Yeah, we don't. Nor should we. So how do you just, if you look back on where you are career to date, how do you define success beyond the titles, the recognition, and the institutional influences?
I mean, it's interesting when you say without the recognition, because I think so, you have to really kind of question yourself and think, okay, it's easy to act with integrity when nothing's at stake, but when you actually, the real test is whether you kind of can make decisions that you'll stand by later, if you're in a high stake environment. So like I said, being able to speak out in public, not just behind closed doors, that kind of thing. So, for me, like, I would say, like, the definitions of success now is a kind of a bit quieter now. So it's like having the control over my time, my energy, the decisions that I make, and trying to be a bit, it's about sort of the real relationships that I have, where there's trust and honesty and mutual respect, and not just people who will actually stand by me and not just kind of endorse me because they've seen the right thing to do. And I really value those relationships. And it's, that kind of sustained energy that's not the burnout, that's something you can really over. And I think probably the big thing I would say is, like, for me, how to measure success is like that you, in some small way, you leave things in a slightly better way than how you found them in the first instance, whatever that would be.
That's quite modest of you, because you've had much more than a small impact, certainly in this world, in this world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So yeah, you've done a lot.
I can tie that to any kind of interaction, whether it's having a conversation with somebody. You just want them to feel better than when they enter the room. It doesn't have to always be the big picture, but career-wise, absolutely. Yeah, I'm really, and I think whatever I do next in my next act is going to have that same mantra.
If well, your work really sits at the intersection of people and systems and change. How do you stay connected to your purpose without burning out?
I mean, as you all know, I'm not the best at doing this. I'm teaching myself to kind of, be better and, take time out. I've just recently done a ceramics course. So I'm like, I need to practice what I preach, and I am getting better at it, I promise you.
You better be, girl, because if you don't look after yourself, what can happen? So yeah, I'll be on you for that. If we looked at your time and your energy and your attention of the past month, what would it reveal about what you truly prioritize?
I love this question. I was thinking about it. So I think what would it reveal? I think that I definitely prioritize others over myself. I prefer giving to receiving when it comes to, gifts, whatever. We spend a lot of money on food. That's going to my bank balance will show that. And I think it's partly because I like a busy house and I want my kids to feel comfortable in bringing people back and being at the heart. I don't spend money on clothes. I share with my daughters, or I buy secondhand. I'm not materialistic. That would show you that.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think it would definitely show you is I drink a lot of coffee. Too much, probably.
I love that. I drink a lot of coffee. There is obviously a visible shift in what's happening and how organizations are approaching DEI from your vantage point. What's actually changing, and what's simply being renamed?
Gosh, I mean, we talk about this a lot at the moment. There was such a, okay, I mean, my mind's buzzing. That's why I'm not being very articulate here. But I would say, for me, for sure, there has been a bit of a pulling back. Post the murder of George Floyd, things went crazy. Every organization was trying to engage somewhere in the DEI world. And I think we've definitely seen a pulling back from that, so to the extent that only the really committed organizations will endure. And I think the challenge that you have in that situation is that it takes an individual or some really committed individuals in an organization to shift things unless it's really embedded into the structure. So that's what I mean about the really committed organizations. And I think we're seeing a lot of, there is some visible differences. I went to London Book Fair a couple of weeks ago, and the first time I went was like 15 years ago. And I kid you not, there's, in the hundreds of thousands of people in Olympia, there was 15 years ago, there was a handful of black faces. And now you will see people from the global majority, like every stand you look. And I think that's incredible, really encouraging. The question is whether those people really have the power at this stage. And I know, because we've done a workforce survey, and I just particularly looking at publishing here, that actually it's people in the mid-level who are leaving. So there's still got the pipeline of people coming through, but there are people leaving. So I think we have to work incredibly hard to make sure that genuine, inclusivity and visibility and all these things actually sees people through to senior leadership.
Yeah, I think the problem is, and it has been since these initiatives, this real push, towards, equity and inclusion, that the door is open and you get to a certain point, you can get in there, you can get the internship, you can maybe even make it to the first rung, but then it falls short. You're not able to get beyond that. And people feel they've done their duty, they tick the box. Of course, there's people out there who are fully engaged and wanting to see, change manifest. But I think that that is a problem, and it does require a constant push from all of us. No, there has to be a pipeline that actually is a clear opening pipeline that leads all the way to the top. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge. Who do you think that these setbacks have hit the most at the moment?
I mean, I think without doubt it is people from marginalized community, and I think communities, and I think by that, and particularly where the intersection hits with, disability and people from lower socioeconomic communities, and without doubt people from racially minoritized backgrounds. And I think they're the first to feel it. And I think that the issue around that is this kind of lack of consistency or transparency, I should say, when it comes to pay rises or promotion or train opportunities for training, and like really understanding the pathways to promotion being as transparent as possible is so problematic, because so many organizations don't do that. This is kind of, so yeah, without a doubt, it hits probably women as well. Anyone from any kind of underrepresented community is the first to be hurt, for sure, in my view.
Are you seeing that leaders are still engaged? Do they have the willingness to be engaged and have conversations specifically about race?
I do think so. I think they are still, but it's not really a question of kind of more or less, because I think it's the how that's a bit different now. So I think that leaders are happy to have, in my view, that what I've seen is people are happy to have the conversation about race, but they're much more kind of scrutinized and less trusted. And I think this kind of creates about, it's difficult to have a conversation that's not defensive or evasive, or it's not performative. So I think, we saw that there was this massive opening that I talked about, post George Floyd's murder. And I think, I don't know if you saw, there was a brilliant report last year which was called Change the Race Ratio. Yeah, it was brilliant. And I just wrote down the notes because I wanted to mention it to you. Like 95% of leaders say that they're confident talking about race. but actually only 30% of employees who are from ethnic minority backgrounds agree with that. And I think that tells you something. It's like it's the trust in how those conversations are handled, but it hasn't kept pace. So,
Yeah, people are afraid of retaliation,
pretty
and
much, yeah.
it's a, and it's real,
It
that it
is.
is.
I think the external pressures, especially from the US, and it's making leaders more cautious again. There's this kind of legal and political pushback, and I think it is really difficult. The conversations are sensitive, and so some companies have scaled back or rebranded programs, like you mentioned.
Yeah, it's
A bit more coded or less explicit about
I
race, for example, but a bit more.
it'll be interesting to see what it's like in a couple of years, or maybe even sooner than that, but there's a lot of damage that's been done. I think it's a
I,
very, very difficult time. In a work that's often challenging and emotionally charged, what gives you a sense of deep fulfillment?
I think it's the individual stories. I mean, for me, there's nothing, turning on the 10 o'clock news and seeing like two of my an unbelievable creative access alumni, Rhianna Croxford and Ashley John Baptiste, presenting stories. One on being a caregiver, one on like something I can't even remember, a story about the Brits. And, it's just so brilliant, so authentic. Or going into a bookshop and seeing one of my alumni was like in the credits and all these kind of things. And I think those are the small wins that I was talking about. Like for me, they really that's what kind of nourishes me, is just seeing like the individual increments of things. You don't have to, for me, it's like one step at a time. When I'm feeling really overwhelmed with anything, I'm like, oh my God, I've got so much work to do. I'm like, okay, just start one at a time. And that sort of extrapolates to my attitude to just, little things building up.
Well, you mentioned you have three girls. What values and beliefs are you instilling in those three girls?
Oh, that's a good. I'd have to ask them. I mean, for me, I really want them to believe that anything is possible, and I think treat people with kindness, and they will treat. I think that's just. I've always tried it. It's just a kind of old adage, but work hard, be nice, and I think I really believe in that, and I think you know I I want them to feel that they have the ability and the capacity to do anything they want, and they need to take care of themselves. And I think we have a lot to learn. They're really good at, I mentioned at the beginning about being in a family that weren't able to talk, and I'm the absolute opposite with my parents, and I'm not with my kids. And I want them to be able to feel like they can communicate and build really kind of authentic relationships in the workplace and elsewhere.
And finally, if you could talk to your younger self, what would you say?
Oh my goodness. I would say you've got this. Like I really like have just lived, and I know pretty much everyone I've ever speak to with that kind of horrendous imposter syndrome. And I think, it's just we're all in the same boat together. We really are, all of us. And I think that if I could say anything, it would be like take advantage of your education. They say education is wasted on the young. I'd love to be able to go back and do some more,
You and
but
me both.
exactly. But I really believe in the power of community. I believe in the sisterhood, and my kids are my number one priority. And I just think, remember how lucky you are, and you can do whatever you want. You know, Protect your time, protect the people around you, and we are part of a bigger world. We're not just living our own lives. So I think, I really believe we have a responsibility to like make the world a better place. And it sounds a bit grandiose, but I've always believed that, it's not just about living your own little life. It's like, how can we, with the privilege that we have, which we do, have an enormous amount of privilege, try to make things a bit different and be an agent for change. It doesn't matter what your background or where you come from. And I think that, yeah, I'll leave you with that. That's kind of my thoughts.
Well, Josie Dobrin, you amazing, beautiful soul. Thank you for spending time with me. Um, I got your back. I know you got mine. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being with me on She Means Business.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been great to chat.